Greetings and welcome. I am Joffrey, and today we'll be discussing why the Farmland terrain type, is an antiquated terrain type that I believe no longer has a place in the Paradox strategy formula. I feel that it is outdated and somewhat problematic for the stereotypes it enforces on certain regions of the world. Now, I don't believe that it is a intentionally harmful thing being done by the devs. I do believe, however, that the way they're going about this is very wrong and is neither fun to play with nor interesting gameplay-wise, nor is it acceptable by the standards of anyone who does not live in specific regions of the world. Now, the core issue that we will be discussing today is the fact that farmland here refers to itself as an anthropogenic terrain, devoted to crops and/or extensive pastures. Now, you see, this is the very crux of why, ever since I started playing Paradox games in my early teens, I would load up EU4 and be confused why, among all the other terrain types, you would have hills, mountains, grasslands, and then one that seems to be little different from the others, a little different from grasslands, farmland. But it stands out because it is unnatural, chiefly of pollution or environmentally changed, originating in human activity, as the definition of anthropogenic tells us. So, you see the problem. There is one terrain type in this game that is not like the others. This one requires human development, but you cannot change the terrain type as the game goes on. So that means there are some places that quite simply start better than others, and those other places will not be able to catch up. They will never be as good. Farmland is over twice as good as Grasslands is. Grasslands in EU5 provides 10% bonus to food production and a 50k population capacity baseline that other modifiers build upon later. But Farmland, with some small, negligible negatives of, oh, it's slower to move through here, and it takes longer for a road to be built by 10%. Well, to make up for that, you get a full extra 10% development growth, which no other terrain type does anything of the sort. Population capacity is twice that of the grasslands. You can have higher level resource gathering buildings, which is just crazy. Well, that doesn't even need to be related to crops then. You could be having any sort of resource. There could be amber in a farmland and you'd make more of it because it's a farmland terrain. And of course, over 3 times the food production of grasslands, just because it is so much better. Just because humans just made it better. But again, not all regions of the world have this, and some have a lot more than others, and you cannot adjust this. You cannot make more of this artificial terrain type. So what I'm going to say, I'm going to explain to you all why this is a terrain that needs to be removed henceforth from Paradox's games and replaced either with grasslands entirely or something I shall get to later. Moving along to here, we can see the distribution of farmlands in France, for example, in EU5's developer diaries, as we've seen. There is quite a lot of it, I'd say. It's not overpowering by any means. In fact, there's over double the amount of grasslands as there is farmland. But you can see even Switzerland down here. This is around Bern, and Geneva is here, I believe. Bern is up here, Geneva's on the lake, I believe. But the point is, there's a lot of these places around all corners of France that you can develop very well. They're just simply better. And that is purely because they are locations that have been artificially boosted by humans. Now, this is odd because, again, you can build farms in this game. You can build farms in CK3. You can build farms in Imperator Rome. But that has no bearing on the terrain type, and there is no way that you can change it as the game goes on. So this is just places that the devs have decided they've been developed enough, so they just have this terrain type that just makes them better at everything. And it will never change. No matter what you do with it, no matter what you do to any other places, there is no way that Bordeaux can ever become farmland as well. There's no way that any place ever in Brittany will become farmlands either. And now this just it seems like it could be fine. You know, people could accept that as, oh well, okay. I suppose some places, certain parts of France, you know, you'll have Flanders here as well. It's just better for farming, whatever. There are some places that have more fertile soils than others. So, surely that just means that any such places have this farmland terrain that makes them better. But it is not so. Now, however, we must take a look at what the real problem here is. This is the full global terrain map. Vegetation, specifically, as there are 3 layers of terrain. Now, you can see the brightly colored spots as we zoom in closely of France. And we can actually see they've added some new ones since that last image we were looking at. With feedback, people have caused them to add even more farmlands, even including the southern coast of England. How wonderful. You look all around Italy, there's plenty. Spain even has some in a cold, arid climate zone, I believe, up in these highlands here. Now, isn't that just wonderful? Obviously, surely, down Egypt's Nile, farmlands, this is all good. But this is where we get to an issue. Look over at the east. We have the city of Constantinople itself, and just a couple other spots just dotted around. You've got Athens and another spot in Greece that are just, well, these places are just, I don't know. They're developed enough, I guess they have farmlands, yeah. But none of the else will ever be. And then you get to Eastern Europe, once we get past Poland. This is just horrendous. Because in basically every Paradox game, I've got CK3 open, for example. We can look at terrain types. Look at this. Whoa. You have Kiev. The Grand Principality of Kiev in CK3. Look at this. How wonderful. And Kiev has farmland because it was the former capital of the Kievan Rus, and you. Well, they're about to become the Kievan Rus now in CK3's time. So the Kievan Rus is about to become a thing. So give them farmlands. And we know that Ukraine has good farmlands. So I suppose that just all around their capital, sure, why not? And then nothing else out here, of course, though. And none of it ever will be as good. It's just better here. But here is where it becomes very strange. You see, we now have examples like Novgorod city itself, which the city of Novgorod is right here. All around it is woods, but the tile itself of Novgorod is farmland because this urban center is, I guess, developed enough with farmlands in the surroundings of it, I guess, to just be granted the privilege of being objectively over twice as good as any grasslands and way better than woods of all the areas around it. Just because why not? But none of the other areas around here will ever be that way. So, but we better also give it to Tver, Nizhny Novgorod, and Muscovy itself. Because you need to make sure that all the places that are supposed to be good and strong are just They've got that terrain that just makes them objectively better than the other areas, and no one else can have that, though. Nowhere in Crimea or any other of the parts of the areas of Ukraine with the black soil get it, for example. That would be just silly. And then, don't get me started on the random farmland strips in the Tarim Basin. Yes. And this is worst of all. When we look at the New World, we see absolutely nothing. No farmland. There is no farmland terrain here. There never will be. The entirety, and there is a caveat, they are going with the terrain of the times. So the eastern seaboard is woods, and it's going to have to stay that way. Canada is mostly forest, and that's okay. That's okay. That's not the problem. But the problem specifically when it comes to vegetation is the fact that there are all these grasslands here. Lots of grasslands all around. But none of these grasslands are given that boost of being better. Because instead of calculating fertile soils or having a special modifier for places that are special, they just make it the farmland terrain type. And this is where it becomes a huge issue, because the New World will never have these tiles. Not in Argentina with its soils, not in the Mississippi, none of the Andean mountains get farmland either. They're just some grasslands. Mexico City itself doesn't have any either. Chitlan, none of it. So this is where it becomes a Eurocentric design choice, not necessarily intentionally, simply because they cannot change it as the game goes on, and it is tied to an artificial action of humans that these terrains exist. It causes harmful, both gameplay and image-wise, projecting itself as being more super Eurocentric with how Europe has it scattered all around. And India, mind you, its famous rivers have a good amount of farmland, and you can say that. But then look at China. China, I've always disliked in the way that they've handled it, where in EU4, you can look at China is basically 50% farmland in EU4's map. And I really don't like this, but because of similar reasons. But at least then you could see it being like, well, it's scattered around the whole world to a degree. You've got drips and drabs of it where stuff is supposed to be just good. And you got that idea. Mind you, South America was pretty terrible back in this game, where Argentina's famous fertile soils was just grassland. But at least you would have some, and the Mississippi did have some farmlands to represent its good soil. But now we've got basically none in China. Just a couple where in those, as stated, areas that are just, well, lots of people live here, so it's just better, and it will always be better. As if there's no other way that they can represent that. And I think that it is a lazy, Eurocentric, antiquated design choice that they need to move beyond. So, what can be done to prevent Paradox from stumbling into this trap going forward? Well, first and foremost, I plan that for my own mod for EU5, I will not be using Farmland. However, if I do use it in some form, it would be renaming it and referring to it as fertile soils as the terrain type. Probably changing its modifiers as well. Now, that you could see, I would choose, if I was Paradox, to instead of representing just these places that are more developed with these objectively better tiles like this, well, Paradox already has in EU5 the ability to just add buildings at game start. If France is so heavily farmed at game start, so that it should have this farmland terrain, why not just give it more farm buildings? It seems rather odd that it should just permanently be able to have more farms, and that its farms are just better for all time. But if they insist, and I would not advise it, but if they insist on having certain areas that um, are considered better because they've been developed, what I would suggest that they could do is take a step back from the terrain map and instead go to modifiers. I would instead apply a location modifier to that spot, which does similar things to what the farmland terrain does, giving you the extra the extra food production and population capacity, maybe even the maximum RGO size. Some of these things that it does better than normal grasslands. Add some of these bonuses as a reward for a player who has thoroughly exploited a region agriculturally, if they really wish to make it function that way. I would advise against it, but that is the only way that I can see that this could be done, where artificial terrain has objective bonuses without simply having a game where the specific location of Kyiv itself is simply the best place in all of Ukraine. Because, in my opinion, what I want to see from EU5 is I want to see it to be better. I want to see EU5 be that game that all the people who grew up playing Civilization like me will look at and say, oh, this is awesome. Building cities, founding towns, upgrading ports, and choosing locations that are best for trade and such. Oh, I can't wait to decide where on Ireland I want to make the true capital of Ireland. But as it stands, the way that Dublin specifically is the only place on all of Ireland that just has this terrain type that makes it better, this farmland terrain, this artificial one, that simply isn't possible. And I know for a fact many fellow people on my Discord server and elsewhere want to be able to play as somewhere like Ireland and choose their own path with it. But that's not going to be possible. And people who play in the New World, if you're playing as the Aztecs, who've been given so much flavor, they've been given an incredible amount of effort. The sheer amount of different Aztec countries, the Nahua faith has been split into a few different groups for the different realms that are around at the time. It's so exciting, but you're always going to be held back. And it's not even by the technology. You can overcome that, but in time, you will simply have to deal with the fact that your land simply is not as good. And that's not right at all. And with that, I will leave you all off for now. Take this as a message to try and encourage Paradox to be its best self, because I sure know that I want Paradox to improve always, and this is one way where it may seem a simple thing, but people really feel it. So take this, Paradox, if you see this, as a message, a call to action to try and think around it, to find a more natural way of representing these things that you want to represent without having to make certain locations just be better for all time. Because I know you can do it. You're capable of it. So, for now, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye!